Welcome to Dead Giveaway, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of playing giving. I'm your host, Matt Treadwell. Join me as I sit down with inspiring professionals who are shaping legacies and making a lasting impact, one gift at a time. Let's dig in.
My name is Abigail Oduol, and I work at EarthJustice and also for community-centric fundraising as a movement coordinator.
We will talk about both of those because I'm really interested in the community-centric fundraising part. But let's start with, what were you doing before you got into fundraising?
That's the million-dollar question. So how far back do you want to go? My
Let's go.
first career.
Yeah, let's go to your
That
first
one?
career because I'm very intrigued about how you made your path to fundraising.
Okay.
So let's
Yeah,
start there.
let's do it. My first job out of college was as a full-time nanny for a family of four. And I loved working for them. I ended up in the role because I really had trouble applying my political science degree. Everyone wanted 3 years plus of experience, which a new graduate did not have. I had been their nanny all summer and they said, "Hey, Abigail, we're going to sit down and have a talk with you." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, what did I do?" Like, "We're going to fire you because we feel that you are not rising to your potential. And we wouldn't want this for our daughter. And you have so much potential. You should definitely be doing something else." And I was like, "Yeah, but you don't have to fire me for me to rise to my potential." So then I asked them for suggestions, like, what should I do? And they said, "Well, you work really, really well with our child who has autism. I'm pretty sure the stuff that the person does who comes into our house, like, I'm pretty sure you could do that too." So I was like, all right. And long story long, I applied to a place to become an autism behavior therapist. I really enjoyed that job. I did that for about a year. I drove around Orange County of Southern California and met with folks in their homes and did ABA, which is a type of behavior therapy that I now have very mixed feelings about. But the work that I did with those families, it was real, it was authentic. I learned so much about myself. I learned so much about engaging with other people. The driving was pretty grueling, so I realized I'm going to need to do something else. One of my lifelong dreams was to apply to medical school. So I applied to medical school and I also applied to this program called Masters in Transformational Urban Leadership. I got into both. And so then I had to make a decision. Do I pursue what I always thought I was going to do? Because I always thought I was going to help people by becoming a doctor. Or do I pursue this new path that's opening up to me, which was the Masters of Transformational Urban Leadership? That one was attractive to me because it had every semester attached with an internship so that you had an opportunity to reflect in an actual role what you were learning. And I felt that that was what was missing from my undergrad. So I decided to go for the master's program, which is also its own exciting long story. But they told me I could do this program anywhere in the world. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's great. My undergrad was in political science, focusing on Latin American politics. I'm going to go to Colombia. And then they're like, actually, no, we don't have partnerships set up in Colombia. I was like, all right, cool. Dominican Republic. Unfortunately, the earthquake happened. And they're like, yeah, you can't go to Dominican Republic. It's not a good time. So I was like, all right, I have given you my best options. You tell me where I can go. And they said, all right, Philippines, India, or Kenya. And quite honestly, I am a Black woman. And I thought, if I go to Kenya, I can probably get my hair done cheaply. So I decided on Kenya. It
That's
wasn't
amazing.
anything. It was very embarrassing when people were like, oh, did you decide to come to Kenya because you have such a heart for Kenya and you've just been like studying Kenya your whole life? And I was like, no, it was about hair care. That's the reason why I chose it.
That is perfect. That is amazing. I love that. Yeah, that's just no notes. That is great. You're like, my choices don't work, so let's just go with hair care. That works.
So I went to Kenya. The program was one semester in Los Angeles. It was in South LA. And then the remainder of the program was in Kenya, in Nairobi, which is the capital city, taking place in a slum in Nairobi. So a slum is kind of what a lot of people imagine when they think about, and I'm using quotations, third world countries, right? They're thinking of people living in a small home that's made of corrugated iron sheets, people sitting immediately outside of their home, selling vegetables, selling fruit, selling ground nuts or peanuts. That's what often comes to mind. That's where I lived. So I lived there for a year and a half, and I focused on learning everything that I could. It was about learning, becoming embedded in a community, understanding how that community lifts itself up and the tools that that community uses. And so I learned a lot about things like asset-based community development. I learned a lot about how organizations have reputations in the United States about their work overseas, but sometimes when you go to those places and live there, you have a very different experience of those folks' work. And that was my introduction to the nonprofit world proper, was through local nonprofits and international development. So right after that, my last term, I had a internship that was focused on cultural orientation at a refugee resettlement agency. I helped them recontextualize their curriculum so that it would be usable for people with a variety of disabilities, not just people who had very obvious disabilities such as blindness or use of assistive technologies. And they said, "Hey, you want to apply to a job? It's very different than the stuff you were doing, but if you want to stay in Kenya, it's an option." So I was like, "Yeah, I think that sounds fun. I get to travel, and I like travel, and I can't afford to travel." So I stayed on as a refugee resettlement officer, and that was a part of the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, which is a program that has since been dismantled. Hopefully, there will be more changes in the future, but only half of 1% of refugees get resettled. And it was my role, along with the role of 500 other colleagues in Nairobi, Kenya, to process the applications for all of the refugees that were in sub-Saharan Africa. And those are not always refugees from sub-Saharan Africa either. So I got to interview someone from a Middle Eastern country who had gone to school in Cuba. And so this person had a lot of security concerns. So they're like, "I do not want an interview in Arabic." And I got to interview that person in Spanish because I had taken Spanish for reading and translation while doing my political science. So there were some really cool intersections, a lot of really terrible, really sad stories. And that was the last piece of my journey before I became a fundraiser.
That is so fascinating. The fact that you were able to still pull some of that stuff that you wanted to from undergrad, because a lot of times when we do undergrad, you just like lose all of that, right? But you were like in Kenya, like, I can use my Spanish now. What? How does that work? But being cognizant of your time today, what brought you back to stateside then?
Yeah. So while I was in Kenya, I met my now husband, and I liked Kenya. Kenya was fun. Everyone's like, "Oh, you stayed in Kenya for a total of 3.5 years. Do you love it?" It's fine. I don't have any major problems with Kenya. I also am not rosy-eyed about most countries personally. I think it just has to do with some of my experiences that color my perspectives. So I decided I think it's time to go home. I miss my family. My family never visited me in Kenya. Can you believe them? So I was like, yeah, I think it's time to go home. So we decided that we would get married in the US rather than getting married in Kenya. And the goal was that we were going to be in the US for 3 years, and then we were going to go back to Kenya after that. It's been 10. I usually meet my goals, since I'm very disappointed in myself for not meeting this one. But so my roommate in the master's program was a fundraiser from Minnesota. Shout out to Alyssa. And she was a grant writer. One of the internships that we had, we wrote a grant together, and I was like, "Oh wow, I am not good at this." And she's like, "It's okay. Like, this is your first one. We did it together. And there are many types of fundraising, and I think you'd be really great at it." And she just kept telling me that. And I was like, I really don't know what you're talking about. Like, why do you keep telling me I would be great at fundraising? And so we had a series of fairly long conversations when I saw that the organization that I worked for doing refugee resettlement was hiring for a fundraiser in California. And so I was like, all right, like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to jump in. It was a mid-level gift officer role. I think it only required 0 to 1 years experience. And so I said, all right, this is my moment. I applied, didn't hear anything back for quite some time. So I took another job in Modesto with World Relief, doing kind of church mobilization and organizational development there. And then I heard back from Church World Service, and they're like, hey, do you want to have an interview? So, yes, I would love that. That would be great to go back to working with them. So I had my first interview, and then my second interview was during my honeymoon. And they were like, can you come in person to Torrance? And I was in Big Sur at the time. So if you know California geography, those two places are not close at all. I had to drive all night on a very windy road where I thought I was going to fall off the cliff every 30 minutes in pitch black darkness with only my headlights guiding me. Ditto wiped me down at a Walmart parking lot and then ran into this interview. Like, okay, I'm here. I really want this job. And of course, I didn't tell them that until after they gave me the job, because I was like, I don't want this to influence how you see me. Long story long, I get into the interview and they're like asking me all these questions that I do not know how to answer. They're like, what's your close rate? And I had never done fundraising before, so I did not really know how to answer that question. And so I realized in that moment, I am not going to be their strongest candidate. And I just need to show them that I'm really interested. I know their programs and I'm a great person to work with. So I told them, well, it depends on how you look at it. My close rate is 100%. They started scribbling furiously, like, oh, wow, tell us more. And I was like, yeah, I'm 0 for 0.
That that's genius. Like, yeah, I don't do it, so I'm 100%, or 0%, either side. Let's roll with this.
So yeah, so that's how I first got into fundraising. They decided that they were going to take a chance on me. They enjoyed being around me, and they decided that that's what I was the type of person they wanted to put in front of their supporters. I was like, I already know your programs. And so at least there's that. What you need to teach me is fundraising. And I'm a blank slate. So I will do it exactly the way you want me to do it, because I don't know anything different. And they're good with that.
That makes sense, because I think a lot of times, especially going into a new organization, the hardest part of the first 6 months is learning everything. So that part. Now you just need to learn how to ask, and we can do that.
Exactly.
The fact that you did it in your honeymoon that's dedication. Did your husband have notes on that?
I really wanted the job, and he was okay with that, but he was like, I totally support this. This sucks, but yeah, getting in front of them in person is going to be your best shot at getting this job.
So what was next for you after the Church World Service?
Yeah, so Church World Service, I learned a ton there, right? Like, that is my scaling up experience in terms of fundraising. I learned so much about how many different people in different places do fundraising. I learned about not just friend raising, but being both friendly and moving forward the relationship with the organization. And I had some really great role models there at Church World Service. So the time the chairman of the board was a Black man, the CEO was also a Black man. And so I remember we had donor meetings in Oregon, and it was just like the three of us representing Church World Service. And I was like, wow, I think this doesn't happen everywhere. I think this is really uncommon. And I think this is a special moment that I get in terms of mentorship as a Black woman, to get to learn from these two other folks.
Yeah, that is very, very rare to have 3 of us at one organization. So that is amazing. I'm so happy for you that you had that type of experience.
Yeah. So, Reverend McCullough, who is the CEO at the time, he was the executive director, he gave me a lot of pointers in terms of my speaking. He's the first person to encourage me to speak in front of others. And he was like, I think you have something. I think here's how you can tailor your craft. And he was able to speak as a person who stands up in front of a congregation every Sunday with new material. And so I learned a ton from him. And I learned a ton about fundraising in general. And when I had been there for 3 years, I believe, let's see. Yes, well, I've been there for 3 years. My mom got sick with cancer, and they had some great policies that allowed me to take care of my mom while she was sick. And then I decided, because my mom was sick, that I wanted to get pregnant to give her a shot at getting to see a grandchild rather than waiting a couple more years like I had planned. So I got pregnant, and when my child was born, my mom's cancer was in remission, and it was so awesome and so
Wow.
beautiful. Of course, it was birth, so it was a little traumatizing, but it was a really, really cool moment. And 3 weeks after he was born, she got a cold, and she's like, "I don't want to get the baby sick." And I was like, "Yes, thank you." So she went home to get better, but she didn't get better. It turned out she wasn't just suffering from a cold, it's that her cancer was back, and it was metastasizing really fast. And every time we had appointments, the doctors or nurses would ask, "Mrs. Evans, do you have a will?" And my mom would say, "No, Abigail knows what I want. Abigail knows what I want." And so we had a lot of conversations. So I was like, "I do not know what you want. Like, can you please stop saying that or tell me what it is you want?" And so we had some really great conversations, but she never made a will. And her health went downhill really, really quickly. And so I was soon juggling the baby and my job because I was back at work and taking care of my mom's very quickly declining health. She went into hospice in my house, and she had two houses. My brother came over from Oregon. He was in college at the time. We were sitting around the table talking about, what is the plan for these two houses? Like, how are we going to take care of them? These houses are not close. Again, California geography. These houses were 2 hours away with no traffic. And I was like, how am I going to manage my job, the baby, and continuing to take care of these houses and taking care of mom? And while we were making that plan, I heard her take her last breath.
Wow.
And we had scheduled for a social worker to come and help us write a will on Monday. And she took her last breath on Sunday night.
Oh,
And so that was a definite turning point. I was out of leave because I had taken leave for having a baby. I had taken leave for my mom's cancer treatments. And so fortunately, Church World Service was super generous, and they were like, "You just lost your mom. Like, you have been through the full spectrum of life." Like, and people donated leave for me to be able to have time to grieve and speed read doing probate in California and hire a lawyer, right? Like, it was a lot of things. And then, of course, you have all the normal family dynamics that happen when someone passes away. And it became really clear fairly quickly that I could not manage all of the different things that were happening, and I could not continue doing my job with all of the different things that were happening. My job required 70% travel, and I had this baby, and I didn't have my support system anymore. Like, what did that now mean for me? So we had like a very lovely conversation. Um, that was like, "Hey, do you have another option for me in terms of work?" And they said, "Unfortunately, not at this time, but we can do our best to give you a runway by allowing you to work from home for a couple of months while you figure things out." And so I will always have love for Church World Service. That's why I shout them out by name. I think they're an excellent employer, just really caring and showing what it means to think about the whole person. So during that end of that period of time, I heard from EarthJustice, like right while as I was getting to the end of that period. and a recruiter reached out and said, would you consider doing charitable gift planning? And I didn't know what Earth Justice was. And I didn't know what charitable gift planning was. But when the person explained it to me, I had this light bulb moment of like, okay, so all the experiences that I just had, I can use those to help other people not go through this. And for their nieces and nephews and children and grandchildren and their sisters and brothers to not experience what I experienced and instead be able to take their values and what's important to them and walk that into the future and create their own plan rather than having to go with whatever the state's default plan is, instead of having the person plan both a funeral and a 101 doing probate in California for themselves. I was like, oh, like my challenges have meaning now.
Yeah.
And so I accepted the job.
Yeah. So playing giving and legacy giving for you is more a calling because you had just gone through the grinder and then this comes up and it's like everything that you just learned, all that is for this moment. So when you got to Earth Justice, that transition from essentially major gifts to plain giving, I know you'd seen it from kind of like the other side of why it is important. How was the transition to now I'm going to try to make the ask for playing gifts and talk to people about why this is important in their lives and in their community?
Yeah, for me, what, like you mentioned, what helped the transition was that it was very personal. It was something that I was still very much experiencing. So my mom had passed away in July of 2018, and January of 2019 was when I started at Earth Justice. And so I was still very much in the probate process, right? I was still very much selling her homes. And so I was able, as I worked to qualify donors, and folks would be 75 and say, oh, I'm young, I don't need a will. I was like, let me tell you a story. My mom was 59 and she was in great health, and doctors said that she was going to recover from her cancer. And I'm not wishing anything bad on you. I'm just saying things happen. And it's better to have a plan than to not have a plan. And to make that plan when you're feeling really good and strong and healthy and when you feel like yourself, rather than when you're under pressure and you're making a lot of other decisions at the same time.
Yeah, that is a great way to try to get through to donors on why they should do that. I'm guessing your close rate is probably still right around 100%.
It is not, but I have a ton of every single conversation I have with donors. I would say in the last 7 years, minus maybe one or two conversations, everyone has been deep, has been moving. There's been people who have said, I have decided I'm not going to leave anything for Earth Justice. And I'll say, all right, like, have you walked through your values? Have you walked through the story of who you were and who you are? And is that reflected in this document that tells the story of things that will be? Because that's what's the most important thing, is that when you sit down to review your documents, or when people after you sit down to look at this, that it reflects the person who you are and your values continue on into the future. And if you feel that that's not the case based on what you've written down so far, you need to change it.
I'm going to start using that in my talks with donors because it's one of those things where we talk about it sometimes, but sometimes verbalizing the importance of, yeah, your document, like you just said, your document tells what will be, but you doing a plain gift tells the story of who you are and who you were.
Yeah. So transitioning into planned giving for me, it felt natural. It coincided with where I was at in that moment. And my conception of what planned giving means has just grown as I've even myself gone through the healing process of going through, very active, very heavy grief, to just experiencing grief on occasions, on a particular day or when I see a particular thing. And so just as I've experienced that transition, my work in planned gifts has also transitioned. It's transitioned in a way that at the beginning, I wasn't speaking very often about this sort of thing. I would speak to donors about it, in a one-on-one context. but not necessarily to a wider audience or even very much to some colleagues I would have. And now, because I'm on the other side of it, I'm like, yeah, like let's all learn from this experience. Like maybe there's stuff that you can take from it too.
And with all experiences, it helps us have better conversations with donors. I had been telling donors for years that they should get a will or a trust, but I couldn't really talk to what that process was until a couple years ago when I finally got one. When you can take your personal experience and say, hey, donor, this is exactly how this actually looks for you, for your family, that if you don't have these things in place, this is what's going to happen if you do have these things in place. Like conceptually, we all know those things in Plan Giving, but until you actually have gone through the process, it's so much harder to really understand the hurdles that might or might not be there for our donors. That was a rough time that you went through, but I can easily see how that just changes the conversations and the type of conversations you can have with donors on why an estate plan is so, just having a plan in place is so important.
Yeah. And I think that, sometimes we get in our own ways as gift officers when it comes to explaining things to supporters. We want them to understand the technical details so badly because maybe we find those very compelling, or maybe we find the tax reasons very compelling. But the reason why people give is because of what's in their heart, right? Generosity comes from the heart. And even for the most wealthy person who is like super obsessed with keeping every single coin that they have, like they have to have a heart connection to what you're doing in order to make this gift and in order to be happy about the gift on the other side of things. And so, one thing that I often say to other plan gift officers is like plan gifts is like baseball, right? You have baseball that you can learn as a first grader. A first grader can totally learn what baseball is and they can play it and they can have a great time, right? Three bases, run around them, stop if the person gets too close. And then there's the baseball that when you go to baseball games and you see the guys in like the front row with the little tiny pencils and the spreadsheet, like they're also watching baseball, but they're doing it at like this very different level. And one of those people tried to explain it to me once, and I did not get what they were talking about. And that's planned gifts.
That is a great analogy. And yes, those people that take those notes don't understand it. One of the things you were talking about, and it brings me to the next part of our conversation, is the having the heart for it. And I'm guessing that's where the community-centered fundraising really comes into play for you.
It really does. Community-centric fundraising, I stumbled on it in right around the time that it came out. So it came out in 2020, early 2020, before the shutdown, before COVID. And community-centric fundraising is about a fundraising model that, instead of grounding it in many of the other things that we ground fundraising in, it's grounded in equity and social justice. So it says, what does it mean to prioritize the entire community rather than individual organizations? What does it mean to create this sense of belonging and interdependence and say that our interactions with each other aren't just individual transactions, but that we are mutually supporting each other as nonprofits, that we are teaching our supporters about this interdependence. For instance, if you work at a university, the work that you do at a university is fantastic. And it cannot happen without the community colleges in your community. It cannot happen without the K-12 organizations in your community, right? Without them, your work actually isn't possible. And so we often like to see ourselves as these like individual silos as organizations, but it's not true. Philanthropy is more of a tapestry. And so what does it mean to look for that interconnectedness, to expose supporters to that, and then to have real conversations with supporters about what it means to be a part of this community? So folks sometimes say, oh, it's the opposite of donor-centric fundraising. And in some ways it is. But in a lot of ways, what it's saying is the donor's just not the center. The center is the community, and a part of that community is the donor, is the volunteers, are the staff, are the board, right? It's all of us that participate in driving this mission forward. And it can't really happen without any of us missing.
Yeah. And it sounds like this is the most direct connection to your work in Kenya, right?
Yeah. I mean, I really believe that it connects to all of the work that I've done. Like I see threads in this tapestry. For instance, when I was an autism behavior therapist, there was a kid we were trying to teach how to talk. He was nonverbal, and we were teaching him how to speak with programs that were in English. His mom only spoke Spanish. And so when I became the therapist on the case, I was like, oh, have we ever considered, and this is pre-Kenya. This is one of my first jobs. I was like, have we ever considered changing these programs to be in Spanish so that he could communicate with his mom? And when he was 5 years old, I rushed out of the room with him, ran to his mom, and he spoke to his mom for the very first time in Spanish.
Wow.
And we both cried. Like it was an amazing, intense moment. And it was that changing of orientation and perspective of like, by having the programs in English, we were serving ourselves, but we weren't serving her. Like
Mhm.
we weren't taking a step forward and allowing her to take a step forward with us. We were saying, okay, we're doing English, everybody get on board. And then in Kenya, with the asset-based community development, I got a chance to learn about how there were some nonprofits that I will leave unnamed, that some of them had really big names, and they'd gone into Kibera slum and they had built apartments. And they're like, all these people live in these like 10 houses. We should build apartments. And so they did. And then nobody moved into them. And then politicians bought up the apartments and rented them out to middle class families. And that's not who those apartments were intended for. The intent behind it was really great, but they didn't consult the community at all because they saw the community as not participants in their own development.
Real quick, you've mentioned it a couple times now. Can you explain what asset-based community development is? Because I don't think a lot of people know what that is.
Oh, yes, definitely. So, asset based community development, also known as ABCD, is a approach to development that the community leads, and it focuses on what assets does the community have? What local assets does the community already have? Because it's from the perspective of everybody has something, and the something that folks have might not be money, but they might have something else, right? They may have knowledge, they may have expertise, may have community ties. There's a variety of other things that are definitely assets in moving work forward that a community may possess. And so asset-based community development identifies, okay, first, what are the local assets? Second, how do we leverage those local assets and community strengths in order to bring power to the community or help the community assert their own power? And so it's more of a facilitation than it is like, I'm going to help you, I'm going to fix you, right? It's more facilitative in nature.
So again, that community centric, like what does everyone need? It really does tie together very well. So as you're thinking of us as plan giving professionals, how can we be more community centered in our efforts?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of us have rushed to things like donor diversification. We were like, oh, when DEI was a more popular thing, many of us were like, oh my gosh, we need more donors of different intersections. That's what we need to do. And we may have not thought about on an institutional level, what does it mean to support fundraisers who also occupy these intersections, fundraisers that you perhaps hired with the goal of reaching out to certain communities. Do those folks feel supported in their work? One tangible example on an organizational level is a fundraiser bill of rights. Amelia Garza and Jennifer Holmes created one. And it's looking at, and we're really excited about doing often donor bills of rights. But what does it mean to set a baseline of expectations that a fundraiser can expect from the organization? For instance, I'm new to an organization. Do I have to give my personal phone number out to supporters? What if my supervisor is? Does that mean I have to do it? Having something like that outlined is really tangible and helpful, especially for fundraisers that come from marginalized groups who might be more at risk of being othered by supporters who like them very much, but may not give them the same consideration that they give to other gift officers in the conversations or in the way they engage. So that's just like one small tangible example on an organizational level. Now bringing it down to like a planned gifts team. One example is we looked at our list of advisors that we were recommending to supporters, and everyone on the list was white. And we know that advisors exist that are not white. And so we said, okay, well, what does it mean to do some networking, to do some research, and find lists and directories of attorneys, of wealth advisors, of CPAs that are also different intersections? What does it mean to do that? And so we explored that. Other options of things to explore is just the way that we talk with supporters about our work and how we work together. I work at a large organization, and so often the message that I give to supporters is that we are not needy, but we are worthy. There are many organizations and things that need your attention, that are asking for your attention, and it would be untrue to say that we are going to close tomorrow if you don't set up this, $1 million CRT. What is true is that we believe we are deserving of those funds, and here's why. And maybe there's a better fit. We'll release you if there's a different values fit, and that has come up sometimes. People have different values that are not in alignment with the organization, and being willing to have that conversation is a part of community-centric fundraising. Having that hard conversation with someone of, oh, that's really interesting. Why did you say that? What does that mean to you? And then exploring, okay, it seems like we might actually have a values mismatch between you and the organization. We appreciate you very much. We appreciate the donations that you've given and the relationship that we've had. And we'd like to be honest that there's a values mismatch. How do you feel about that? And having that honest conversation that often in our desire for achieving donor centrism and closing every single gift, we avoid. We often avoid anything that we think will be hard, anything that we think will bring conflict. But any genuine relationship that you have with folks means that you can experience conflict and then you grow closer as you resolve it. I know that's hard.
No,
Isn't it?
it's deep, and I love it because that's like just you want to let that sit there and kind of be it. But I have other questions to ask too. So you mentioned earlier the meeting you had in Oregon where it was you and then the two other Black fundraisers. When you have thought about your mentors, what mentors have you had? How did you find them? I know one of the things I struggle with is like that balance of who can help me deal with just straight career stuff, but who's going to understand the other dynamics when I'm looking for a mentor. So who have you gone to for mentorship?
Yeah, there's been a variety of people in different areas. There's one person, Molly Marsh Heine, who's now at NRDC. She was the senior vice president of development at EarthJustice. And she's very much a go-getter, like kind of like big picture development. She has an MBA. And so she really encouraged me as to what was possible as a working mom. And so that's the intersection that we both occupied. And she was really able to give me a lot of encouragement as well as a lot of challenging pushes within that intersection of like, no, some of this stuff is possible. I would say within the CGP community, I've found a lot of mentors. I started going to charitable gift planning meetings locally. First, I was going to meetings in Northern California. I was able to really connect with one of my colleagues, Robin Steele, who's at EarthJustice. And this is like a shout out list, I suppose.
No, this is great.
Um,
Name them all. Let them get their flowers.
she was like, hey, there's some folks that I used to work with at a previous role, and I think they might offer some really great mentorship for you. One of them, it turns out that I was a RA with at UC Irvine. And so that was hilarious when I realized, like, oh my gosh, like, it's you. And then the second person is Bill Strickland, who has served both in Southern California charitable gift planners and on the national level, currently at City of Hope. And he has provided really excellent career insights for me. Like, we've just had these like really interesting conversations where I've been like, hey, like, here are the things that I'm doing. Am I doing the right sorts of things? Like, what might be next? He's had this like really long, amazing career in planned giving, and he's extremely knowledgeable. And I'm like, do I need to go get a JD? Like, what do I need to do in terms of professional development? And he's been really a great guide for that. And the tag team guide in terms of professional development, speaking circuit, and asserting myself as Carlo LaRue, all the letters after his name. He has been really fantastic for saying like, hey, like, here's the letters after my name that you might want to consider getting. And just really contextualizing things that can feel really daunting and complicated when you feel like an outsider looking in. He's been a great resource in terms of, hey, what about speaking engagements? What speaking engagements should I take? What topics should I focus on? I'm really, I'm a Black woman in America. It's really, really easy to be like, you could be the DEI speaker. And it's like, but what if I don't want to be the DEI speaker? What if I want to talk about complex assets? What if I want to talk about DAFs? How can I become that person to you all too? And so Carlo has been really, really helpful in helping me figure out what credentials and what courses and what things I need to do in order to scale up my expertise in other areas. And so since then, I've written a lot about DAFs, and I've written about a variety of topics. My favorite intersection to write about is Marvel. And I know that not everyone loves Marvel, and that is okay. I accept you for who you are. But Marvel and fundraising. And so looking at like kind of what fictional universes have to say about the universe that we actually live in.
I need to read all of that because I'm a big Marvel fan. Before we go, because we're quickly running out of time, who would you love to hear on this podcast?
That's a really great question. Honestly, I would love to see more cross-pollination, of course, because of community-centric fundraising. I am very into what are the intersections, who are the different people we can work with, and how can we work together. Chantel Orling from EcoJustice, she is a part of the Canadian Charitable Gift Planners Association, and she has really interesting and amazing writing. She's a guest lecturer at one of the universities in Canada. Oh, I forgot which one, but she's prolific. She is so up and coming. It's bananas. I would love to hear her on this podcast. Like, if possible, Tanya Rumble, also out of Canada. Tanya Rumble looked at she did a study looking at gift acceptance policies and asked the question of like, how many organizations in Canada's gift acceptance policies, I think she was looking specifically at universities, matched what they said their values were.
That is interesting.
Those two Canadians, get them here.
Thank you for joining us on Dead Giveaway, where every gift tells a story. A huge thank you to Abigail Oduol for sharing her journey with us. Join us next month when we are joined by Dave Leibengood, recently retired Chief Client Relationship Officer with TIA Caspic. None of this would be possible without my amazing producer, Jessica Hall, and the support of the entire National Association of Charitable Gift Planners staff. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please share the show and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening to Dead Giveaway, where generosity lives on.